We are live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Council for Strategic Affairs platform. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I'm the president of the Council for Strategic Affairs. Today is September 21st, Saturday, September 21st, 10 a.m. Eastern Day Time. Those of you who registered probably saw this flyer from us, and the topic for today's program was US's Indian Ocean Strategy. And our distinguished speaker was supposed to be Dr. Kaush Arha. Before we go on to the topic per se, I will briefly tell you about the Council for Strategic Affairs. CSA imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. We encourage publication of articles on geopolitics. We condemn terrorism in all forms and in any country worldwide. Council aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. CSA is registered as a 501c3 organization with the IRS in the US. We will encourage people based in United States to donate to the CSA, and there's a link over here. Edwin, please mute everyone else. We have a monthly roundtable discussion on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Day Time. There's a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. EDT, as we were supposed to have today. We also have a feature that is a one-on-one interview titled Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanji. We organize symposia, meetings, conferences. We promote publication of articles. We do have a summer internship program for college students and a fellowship training program in strategic studies. Again, we will encourage you to donate and support CSA. The link is there. Now, this is the picture of Dr. Kaush Arha, who was supposed to give the lecture today and have the discussion. Kaush Arha is president of Free and Open Indo-Pacific Forum. He is also non-resident senior fellow in Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. He's a senior visiting fellow at the Crash Institute of Tech Diplomacy at the Purdue University. He previously served in USAID as a senior advisor on strategic engagement. He co-chaired USAID with USAID Deputy Administrator, the Clear Choice Executive Council, comprised of agencies' leadership to operationalize the US national security strategy in executing US developmental assistance and diplomacy in the global competitive space. He was previously senior transition advisor at the US Embassy in Kabul, where he coordinated with the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, International Security Assistance Force, and coalition partners in the completion and execution of the first tranche of transition strategy. As a senior coordinator for agriculture, he also directed the US Interagency Agriculture Assistance in building the Afghan agricultural economy. Prior to that, Dr. Arha served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary and Associate Solicitor General in the Department of Interior. He has been a practicing attorney and a visiting professor. He began his career as a senior executive for the state of Wyoming, and he received his PhD from UC Berkeley and his JD from the Stanford University. And again, this is one of his pictures. And let me show you. This is a map of Indian Ocean. It has a wide swath of ocean with multiple sub-regions that have geopolitical significance. A housekeeping note, I would encourage everyone to keep themselves on mute to avoid noise interference. Somebody today had their mic open and they were conducting personal conversation. I don't want repeat of that. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speaker or participants. Only those members of audience who identify themselves openly will be asked to pose questions. So no anonymous questioners, please. We usually moderate the questions through chat function, and we encourage you to be very specific in posing your questions. This event is being recorded live and is being live streamed on our YouTube channel as well. It will be available in future also as part of our content on our website. So the topic was US's Indian Ocean strategy. And the reason we tried to organize this lecture and discussion was because Dr. Kaush Arha on September 1st published an article in National Interest on United States possible strategies in Indian Ocean to contain China. And I read that article and I was very impressed, and I got in touch with him and he graciously agreed to participate in this event. But I'm very sorry to say that he is not available. I've tried to contact him. So in absence of the speaker, what we will do that we will have a discussion amongst ourselves on this particular topic. As you know, today is also the meeting of the quadrilateral security dialogue in Delaware, where 4 heads of governments of the quadrilateral security dialogue, President Joe Biden, Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Ishida, they are meeting along with the Australian Prime Minister. And this would be probably the last Quad head of government, head of state meeting for President Biden. There are some declarations from Deputy Assistant Secretary Kurt Campbell that United States is going to harmonize its geopolitical strategy with India in an Indian Ocean. So we expect a lot will come out once the current Quad meeting is over, and in next few months, as you know, that Indo-Pacific has become a hot geopolitical issue. On one hand, Chinese PLA Navy is increasing its footprint in the Indian Ocean region. China has acquired a military naval base in Djibouti in 2017. China was also trying to get naval bases in other countries. They have a de facto naval base in Gwadar Port in Pakistan. They have a naval base which is not euphemistically called something else in Ream in Cambodia. China has also been hobnobbing with Maldives for an island to be used as a naval base. Apparently, they have purchased an island in Maldives. So plan is at this point in time, when I say plan, it's PLA Navy, is the largest navy in the entire world. The number of naval assets by the plan actually exceeds the United States naval assets, although technologically they are far behind United States. There are strategic implications when China increases its footprint in any area, because they start with very benign intentions and then they start making claims. That has been the pattern. Some of the claims are made based on quote unquote history, historical presence of China in certain areas. And then China makes a maximalist claim that the entire area belongs to China. So China has been fairly active in Indian Ocean region since 2006, 2007, when they first sent their 3 naval ships to quote unquote combat Somali pirates that were posing a threat. And after that, Chinese naval assets have been present in Indian Ocean region almost perpetually. China also has this facade of sending the survey and research ships in Indian Ocean, but basically these are spy ships. So at any point in time, there are 3 spy naval ships of China in the Indian Ocean region. China's nuclear submarine force is becoming very potent, and the number of assets has been increasing. So in this era of increasing threat from China that has hegemonic ambitions, at least to people in the Indian Ocean region and to the littoral countries in the Indian Ocean region, it poses a threat. China is having its relationship with Russia, and since 2023 has also involved Iran into conducting joint naval exercises in the Indian Ocean region. A couple of years ago, in an op-ed piece, I wrote about a new quad, an anti-quad quad called PRIC, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, and China. Apparently, the cooperation of this quad is also increasing, and with naval base in Gwadar, probably there will be much more activity in Indian Ocean region. Since our speaker has no show, we will have a discussion, interactive discussion amongst ourselves, and maybe I will invite Commodore Ranjit Roy, who is based in New Delhi and has been on our platform before and has naval background as a retired Commodore. He runs a museum also of Indian naval history in New Delhi. So, Commodore Ranjit Rai, do you have any
Can you
comment?
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. We can hear you, but we don't see you. Looks like we lost Commodore Rai. While we are waiting for Commodore Rai to rejoin, why don't I invite Ambassador Kapur, who has been one of our international advisors on the advisory board. Ambassador Kapur, maybe you can start with your comments, please.
Thank you very much, for setting up this discussion. I appreciate that very much. It's a very, very important topic because the Indian Ocean, there are about at least 100,000 merchant ships which crisscross the Indian Ocean with trade and other.
Oh, I am sorry to interrupt you, Ambassador Kapur. We are very pleased to see Dr. Kaush Arha, who has joined. Dr. Arha, we had started a kind of discussion, but since you have joined, we will yield the floor to you and you can make an opening statement. I did refer to your article that was published in National Interest. I've already gone through your introduction. I had apologized for your not being present and we were trying to do a discussion. But since you are here, kindly make an opening statement and then we'll pursue with the discussion. Kindly unmute yourself, sir.
First of all, thanks again for the invitation and your kind consideration. I apologize for my delay. I am in Rome for an unscheduled meeting and I had to rush back through Rome traffic to be able to take this. And so you thought the traffic was bad in Delhi or Gurgaon or some Calcutta. It was bad here. So I'm sorry for the delay. And then we still haven't gotten back. So I've taken a detour in a hotel room so I can at least log in and talk to you guys. So sorry for being late. I hate it. I know it's Indians are more accommodating it than most, but still, I respectfully beg your forgiveness for that. And quickly to get into the topic of the day, I think you heard this a lot. There's a new book by Dalrymple about what was the Golden Circle or the Golden Period or something about how India influenced Europe. But in a bigger scheme of things, there are sort of three important and interesting currents that affect India, and I'll mention them briefly for about 5-6 minutes, and then rather have conversation than me talking about it. One is certainly this whole, the oldest trade in the world happens from India to Europe. It basically lasted from before Christ up to, I think, almost independence, probably Cold War, and the Middle Eastern conflicts, whether it be Iran, Iraq, whether it be Israel, Gulf issues, probably precluded that, including the Russia uh, angle of it in the north. So that precluded it only for sort of 50 to 70 years, and now we have a resurrection of it, uh, captured by the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. But I think that's an important phenomenon, much more important than what the Belt and Road is or the Silk Road is. And India has an important role to play. Middle East has an important role to play. Egypt, Eastern Mediterranean have important role to play. So I think that's one phenomena which will have a very big push in very recent times. That's one. Indian Ocean. So let's plant that in one spot. The other one is that if there's ever a conflict in the Pacific Ocean, whether it be some issue on South China Sea or Taiwan or whatever, the Indian Ocean will become very, very relevant, just largely as a sort of feeder line to China. And so that's, I think, is a important move there. And from India's perspective, it in its own interest wanted to be both a dominant naval power within the region, and more importantly, not allow China to become the dominant naval power surrounding it with bases and others. So it's linked to a possible conflict, but even more importantly, linked to the first point of growing India. Mediterranean sort of trade and issues related to that. So that's, I think, number two. And then there's a broader theme. For all these reasons, I think the US India relationship is getting stronger by the day. There is a term that the Indians like to use a lot, which is strategic autonomy. And so the question that India would rather have and make a decision going forward is to whether achieve strategic autonomy or talk about strategic autonomy. So I think they're not the same thing all the time. I think that's an important element as well. But having said all that, I think Indian foreign policy, Indian foreign posture, both regionally and global, has grown in the last 5 and 10 years more than it did in India's first 60 years. That is not due to any one person or any one party, but I think it's just a cumulative effect of India evolving through its economic and political stability, plus economic growth, plus new alliances or partnership. Any and all of them has been rather remarkable from where it started. So where it started to where it is pretty remarkable. Where it is and where it needs to go is still a long way to go. So those are just some opening thoughts. There's enough there to talk for hours, but I'll stop there and have a conversation with our colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arha. We understand, when you are in a foreign country and not at your base, It is difficult, so we are very grateful indeed. I did introduce to our audience that the reason I invited you was your article in National Interest that was published on September 1st. And that was the catalyst for this particular meeting and discussion. So I'm going to invite Ambassador Kapur, who is on our International Advisory Board. Just before you joined, he had just started to give his comment. So, Ambassador Kapur, I'm sorry that I interrupted you, but I had to.
No, I'm so glad that Dr. Stara was able to join because it's very important to listen to him. I feel we have just got a very brief glimpse about his thoughts and ideas on this very important issue. So I'd much rather, yield my time to him. But before that, I'll just make a few brief comments. I think it's a very important inflection point for India's emergence on the global stage as an important country. The footprint is increasing, and we have the Prime Minister of India who had just landed into USA maybe just an hour or two back, and he will be having a lot of important meetings while he's here. Some of it will, of course, focus on the Indian Ocean rim also, but he's also having a sort of a one of the final meetings with the President Biden on a bilateral platform before Biden completes his presidency and moves on in life. So I think it'll be a very good occasion for the two leaders who have had very good discussions in the past also and have had a good chemistry in the interactions to really get into the depth of issues as per the perceptions of President Biden. And now that he's going to become hopefully an elder statesman and a guiding light for if Kamala Harris is the next president. So to that extent, for Prime Minister Modi to sort of discuss with him his thoughts as of the last 4 years as to where the world is, where the world is going, and how can India play a more important role? How can America get back on its feet after all the blows which have been delivered to it, after all the disruptions caused by the Palestine-Israel situation, the disruptions caused by the Russia-Ukraine situation, after the terrorism and jihadi terrorism, particularly becoming such a big challenge for the world, and China becoming such a big disruptor for the world. Uh, and these are the two big issues besides the wars which are ongoing and have impacted the economies of a very large number of countries, particularly in the Western world. So, how to make the Quad stronger? Because one of the important agenda points of the meeting is the Quad, and the Quad is primarily for the Indo-Pacific, which includes the Indian Ocean in a very significant way. So, how do we make the Quad more impactful, more effective? There's of course discussion of going to be on cancer moonshot, how to deal with the solutions to cancer and medical interventions which can help in mitigation of cancer. That's going to be an important part of the agenda. Also, I guess they will have to at some stage uh, start talking more directly to the issue of geopolitical security and not couch it in the language of keeping the sea lane safe and secure and open, but in more direct terms as to the challenges being faced by the Indo-Pacific countries from the malevolent actions of China and the other, partners of China, including Iran and Pakistan. So those sort of issues will have to be addressed head on. Uh, the Quad has a very good possibility to become an important entity in that entire region. I don't think AUKUS or any of the others have got as much relevance or importance in the global scheme of things, and it can lead a lot of nations into a peaceful and more secure future. So it has to understand that that is its role. So that is going to be an important aspect. So besides the bilateral with President Biden, which I've already mentioned very briefly, there would be a lot of other bilaterals with a lot of the other world leaders, with Prime Minister Modi. So India's emerging footprint on the global stage will also be an important, agenda point in the discussions. The Prime Minister would be addressing the Summit of the Future at the United Nations. So that is going to be another important platform for him to outline his vision for the future. As we know, he has got very great visions, and about India's place in the world is also a very important aspect of his vision. So he will outline all those aspects in the summit for the future at the United Nations. He's also going to be addressing the Indian diaspora at New York in the Nassau Coliseum, for which I am headed to very shortly. It's tomorrow, but we are going to be in the New York area for today and tomorrow, so that we take part in that event and get a chance to interact with some of the people who will be participating there and present there. He's also going to be interacting very significantly in a roundtable.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapur. Let's come back to the topic instead of
Right.
going on Prime Minister Modi's visit.
Appreciate
I
that.
would bring Dr. Kaush Ara back into the discussion. And Dr. Kaush Ara, you have spoken about certain strategies that US can adopt in the Indo-Pacific region to contain China. Now, one of the issues that has been there, when United States Navy does freedom of naval operations, missions, China has criticized United States, attitude as hypocritical because United States is not a signatory to UNCLOS, UN Convention on the Law of Seas. In your opinion, will it be helpful for United States to have a smooth geopolitical strategies, maritime strategies in the Indian Ocean region if US were to ratify the UNCLOS treaty?
Yeah, I think the short answer is absolutely yes. But I mean, I think yes, it would be good, but no, it does not. It will not change one bit U.S. behavior because, first of all, the political reasons why there was a difference of opinion in the U.S. Congress for ratification had really not to deal with navigation or whatever. It has to deal with issues related on high sea, the magnesium mining of stuff in areas which did not belong to any one country. And there was a dispute whether that mining, then the sort of the rents of that exercise was given to the country or the actor that actually did the mining, or it should be spread in sort of a world distribution of various all the world people. And I too believe that it should go to the person who does the entrepreneurship. Otherwise, people won't go it. So that was the reason why that got hooked up. Um, Other more important issues of the sort of the territorial waters, the EEZ, all that stuff is widely accepted by America, and actually America has been abiding by all the attributes and the various sections of UNCLOS without being a ratifying member. On the other hand, I mean, I don't want to turn it into a he said, she said stuff. That China is a member and does not abide by it and has not abided by the decisions that both the UNCLOS, the maritime law, and the International Court of Justice wrote it against him on all this vis-a-vis Philippines and other South China islands. So I think these are just rhetorical points that China can make, and it should absolutely should make, but I don't think that that has a material or a dispositive effect of using these sort of particular legalese. Anyways, having that set aside, in the Indian Ocean, if I were to just follow up on Ambassador Kapur's thought, I think the most important development, and I didn't want to get into it because it's an exercise in it to itself, but by far the biggest, I think India's biggest foreign policy action, advance, a sort of signal of India's assuredness, has been joining the Quad. And so the Quad, it's literally about India in many ways because US has strong relationship with Australia, strong relationship with Japan. Japan, Australia also have strong relationship. I think bringing India into the fold, which is sort of historically hesitant of joining groupings of sorts, that is a big deal. I have a slightly different take than most of my Indian colleagues on strategic autonomy and non-aligned movement and others, but that is a big deal. And the future of Quad will define not only India's future posture on the world in the region, but also what happens in the Indian Ocean per se, directly. And at some point, I hope that India becomes self assured and confident and sort of comfortable in its own skin. I wrote another note which says India should, under Modi, India has moved from straddling fences to standing tall. So I think there's a different elements of how a country that always wanted to keep legs in every different section, that you can allow that when you're a minor player. When you become a big player, they don't have that luxury anymore. You have to stand on something and say, "You're my friends, and I'm not weaker from my friends, and I'm not weaker from my enemies. I can stand on my end." To that end, I completely support Ambassador Kapur's point that at some point it would be good enough for Quad to say, okay, the main reason we are together is that because we have a shared threat with China. And yes, we don't want to turn it into a very overt hostile act, but that's the reality. We'll do a lot of humanitarian and moonshot and maritime security and humanitarian relief and vaccine diplomacy. But what we are doing behind the closed doors is a substantial amount of defense collaboration. We're increasingly training together, we're increasingly having things stop by and others, the 2+2. As a result, not only US India relationship have grown astronomically, but US Japan and US Australia has grown immensely because of Quad as well. Sorry, not US, I mean India, Australia, and India, Japan have grown immensely, including the recent 2+2 between Japan and India. So all these are headed in the right direction. At some point, I don't know who that is fooling. Perhaps certainly not China, because it blames Quad day in and day out as a sort of some action. Anyway, so to the degree we can get more to what it is and what the great help and benefit it would be within Indian Ocean in particular, I think life becomes a little more clearer and you talk a little bit more plainly and accurately than in sort of euphemistic references here and there. So I think that's a useful point. But happy to take any more questions on that and any other matter. Over.
Okay. There's a question in the chat room. US highlights India as a huge strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific region, but how do you see the US balancing its other co-partners? Like, for example, Canada, which is at the moment having a number of challenges in its relationship with India. It
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
The question is from Dr. Vineet Singh, who is based in Canada.
Okay. Well, I think the answer to that, to some degree, lies in the way India responded over the recent spat between Canada and India. I mean, I think the U.S. I thought um, uh, responded as maturely and as even-handedly as we possibly could have done. I think that may have been different just a few years ago, where things would have been very different, and I think it was handled much better than the earlier New York issue with the one of the Indian consul generals with some house help issue. So you see, India has come a long way in the strategic partnership from, I think if you just lay the data points on how the New York thing played out how the Canadian thing played out, and then how a Canadian-like U.S. incident got played out. And the way the Canadian incident, and it's sort of a somewhat similar type of allegation in the U.S., were in U.S. newspapers maybe for a day, maybe just about that, as opposed to the earlier New York incident, which was in New York papers for almost a week or two. So both from the way the government handled it and the way the press and media handled it, I thought that should be it speaks for itself in many ways. As far as strategic partnership, I think there's a very realistic issues related on it. So where we look at shared, a shared interest of U.S. and India, I think, are brought together by obviously a shared adversary, but it goes further. I mean, I think India can be an enormous partner of U.S., as I've written several times, and it's in something called, I've mentioned that US and India is a great power partnership. In the era of great power competition, where you literally have, if you're gonna suggest that US and China are in a great power competition, then you also need to have the other side of it. You need to have great power partnership in the era of great power competition. And size matters. And the size of the oldest democracy, the largest democracy, the world's largest economy, soon to be the world's third largest economy. I mean, those are of size to have great power partnership, which again has a shared adversary, but they have very synergistic roles in working with the global south. They have very synergistic role in determining the future of world digital economy. They have synergistic role in actually reshaping the world to have a more equitable sort of representation in the 21st century, just like U.S. Europe shaped the world in post in 20th century to the world, two world wars and the Cold War. I think I would argue in the 21st century it behooves that U.S. and India are the ones who have the great power partnership to do so. I think Canada plays a role, and I think sometimes these small issues are turned into big issues depending on where you sit. I can certainly see that from the Indian perspective, but the Canada's relationship with India, so America will not fully appreciate India's relationship with Bangladesh because we're just not there. You're neighbors. You have many issues. You got to live with each other. Same we have with Canada. I mean, so it's just a neighbor, and it's where we have largest trading partner with each other and all the rest of it. But in the area of Indo-Pacific and the way you're seeing the shared adversary and everything else, in that real politics, India plays a very, very substantial role, and Canada has not been as active. I've actually just had some very hard and very frank discussion with Canadians where I said, you're our closest partner, literally and figuratively. And on a lot of the big issues that America is facing, I don't see you. I don't see you next to me. So at some point, when you have a little bit more serious prime minister than the one who's there right now, I think it'd be useful to sort of reevaluate that particular relationship. So that's where we're at Canada, but we have other issues, but it has been one of our closest partnership. But I don't think it's in any case either or we are sort of balancing one or the other or whatever. India is the only country on the Asian landmass, only country with the land border with China. They say if you don't have an Indo-Pacific strategy without India, it's difficult to have. You can have a Pacific strategy, tough to have an Indo-Pacific strategy without India.
So we
Over.
have a question from one of our viewers, Aaron De Los Reyes, who actually put a very informative article linked to that. But his question is, given the makeup of Indian naval platforms by Indian Armed Forces, should the focus be on naval joint defense, contractor partnership, etc.? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I just think that uh, so all of the above, as I've written in that little note on Indian Ocean strategy, I think the sky is the limit of the potential collaboration between US and India on the defense side. And I think in many ways, the two ministries that have been leading the relationship over last, I would say, 2 decades or more, it's really our Pentagon and the Armed Services Ministry of Defense on the Indian end. There's a lot of baggage with this sort of, I mean, not, but I think it's unhelpful, non-aligned movement, pro-Russia, strategic this, strategic that sort of an element. But it sort of the future certainly lies into co-production, interoperability, intelligence sharing, sort of sharing of a logistic maintenance facility, all those stopover. I mean, that's where the future is, and we'll get there. Just not because of any political; it was pure practical nature. If India is going to be a dominant Indian Ocean partner, then this is what comes with it. And similarly, if US wants to value India's relationship and India wants to value US relationship, then that more or less sort of comes with the territory. On strategic autonomy, which mentioned several times, and I think it comes. So yeah, I think it's worth looking at the strongest allied partners of America, whether it be United Kingdom, whether it be Israel, whether it be Japan. And one can gauge those countries' strategic autonomy for having a strong relationship with America and in absence of having a relationship with America. I would argue that the strategic autonomy is an orders of magnitude higher, but for having, I mean, because they have a very close relationship. So that doesn't mean that they do what we say. All three of them do completely different thing. Israel is a living proof right now. I mean, he doesn't, I mean, entirely dependent on it, but it's not like Biden can pick up a phone and tell Netanyahu do this or that. So I think we're getting confused about the topic, but and this should not be a sort of a holdover in sort of moving much closer on the defense production side. I mean, I mean, I have argued for it, for India being brought it into the AUKUS Pillar 2. I mean, the only reason that prevents it is Indian side, not on our end. India comes to us several times and says, we need more tech transfer, more technology. The regulatory hurdles to get there on the Indian end and not on the US end. So we've got all these areas which we have a lot of potential to move forward for each other's interest, not because we're doing a favor to each other. It is in very, very close and near national interest of both countries to align with each other purely for their own respective national interest. So yes, the answer to the question is yes, a long way of saying yes, that's what we should focus on.
I think if we look in the last 2 decades, the partnership has been going strong day by day. And also India's level of confidence has been increasing in Indian Ocean region day by day, irrespective of the party in power. In early 2000s, in 2000, December 2005 and January 2006, when there was a major tsunami in the area, India was one of the countries that was participating in recovery and rehabilitation and rescue operations along with the Western naval forces while China was absent. So that is around 2005, 2006. As we speak, India is now a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, whether it is Somali pirates, whether it is Houthi rebels, actually, attacking the commercial merchant vessels. So besides Quad, there are other mechanisms like I2U2 and IMAC, in which India is a full participant. Uh, yes, one can criticize India about the hang-up about strategic autonomy, but also there's the other side to it. Pentagon and Ministry of Defense they are having great amount of cooperation. But that is not reflected in the same wavelength by the State Department and certain organs of the State Department which continue to have irritant effect on bilateral relationships. So there is a need for self-introspection on the other side, that if you have an ongoing partnership, a burgeoning relationship with a country that has a civilizational history. It's not, country came in 1948 just like Israel came in 1948. India is a civilizational nation, and the US policy establishment has to understand that just like there's a doctrine of American exceptionalism, there's a doctrine of Indian exceptionalism. Actually, even before United States was born, Indian Navy was going up to Indonesia. The Chola Empire had a very strong navy. So there is a tradition that was lost, but working country to country, there have to be some understanding of the sensibilities of each other. From US side, we can talk about India saying about strategic autonomy and non-alignment. On Indian side, friends do not do enter into your own economic zone and do freedom of naval operations as US Navy did on Malabar coast. And not only did that, made a public announcement to that. So those are the kind of things that do not help. Any comments, Dr. Arha?
I think I agree with your broader point that there are the way I have sort of tried to frame it, that there are strong core interests of the two countries. And I would just like to say the two countries are a focus on the core interest. There are sort of peripheral issues, which, as you said, are somewhat irritant. Um, I think from the American perspective, I think Americans have a very poor understanding of Indian democracy. So not so. I think the comments that you hear against Modi, against BJP, against sort of the Indian sort of democracy, it's basically at best uninformed, and at worst it's sort of misdirecting. So I think that's unhelpful. Similarly, I think the Indians have a very poor understanding of sort of America's worldview, and every action taken, whether there is a meeting with Pakistan or even a freedom of navigation stuff, it's taken as an affront, which neither is it meant nor is it what intended. But so on both ends, there are what these both of them I would call them peripheral issues. I think you can talk a lot, and you're right about it, that the difference between the way the DoD and the defense industries do, they're focusing on core issues. The way the media and to some degree, as you said, the diplomats do, there's a lot of churn on these sort of what I would call peripheral issues. And I think at some point they are just semantics, and I'm fine. I mean, I think two countries ought to have it. I don't think they're deeper than that. And if they are deeper than that, then we need to look at it. So I think, yes, India is a civilizational country. I'm just sitting in another civilizational country. I can go to Greek and listen lectures about civilization country. Everybody has a civilization country, and I agree with you that every country is an exceptional country in some ways. Yeah, and certainly India is very much an exceptional country. So, my only humble request is strategically autonomous countries don't talk about strategic autonomy. I just beg that point. Vietnam receives more funds from us, more defense sort of stuff from us. In the same darn year, it hosted Biden, Putin, and Xi. It's as strategic autonomy, if not more autonomous than India is. But so it's just a semantic issues. I'm fine. I don't care. I think every country should have the right, and every country by definition should be strategically autonomous. I mean, that's the very definition of being a country. It's the context of in why it's shaped, and so on occasion it becomes a peripheral issue, but that's fine. because to be, anyway, I won't want to spend any more time because I just don't think it's that important or relevant. I think the question should be, as you laid out, and I think Ambassador Kapur said, and some of the other comments have said, the it's very, very important that the US and India focus on the core issues and try to contextualize the peripheral issues. They don't do away with them, because your democracies, your big democracies, you can have difference of opinions, all that is fine, but don't allow the peripheral issues to take more time than the core issues, and for God's sake, to derail or distract or digress from the core issue. So that's all I would say in response to your Kate statement.
I think that is a wise way of moving forward. But looking at the Indo-Pacific challenges and what we face at this point in time, it might be a good idea to recapitulate on the lost opportunities, how this Chinese threat has become so omnipresent in the Indo-Pacific region. Uh, Around 2013, 2014, when China was building these artificial islands in the so-called South China Sea, which I like to call West Philippine Sea or South Vietnam Sea or South Champa Sea, United States under Biden administration actually did not take any stronger steps, while it was very, very evident that China is militarizing that part of the world. Any comments on that, on possible lost opportunities? Should China have been checked at that point in time?
I think that's an again, not necessarily in that specific instant that you referred to, but in the larger context, I think that's very much true, that we took a long time to see that China is not only not changing to become a responsible stakeholder or international partner, but actually going exactly in the opposite direction, both literally, figuratively, industrially, ideologically, militarily, every other way. And I think that is true. I think you could argue that we were almost 20, 30 years too late. I mean, I think starts from China getting into WTO, where we argued strong that it should be in WTO at very strong counsel of our allies to the contrary. WTO is basically dead the day China got in it. And so it's basically, anyway, you cannot have the largest economy be coming in as a developing economy with different rules than Switzerland has. So I think it's a difficult scenario. But having said that, that is the expected norm, not the unexpected norm. I mean, since Nehru's Indochini bye bye to Nehru's progeny till today, there are strong Indo-China relationships, some of which we don't even know what they are. So India also has taken a long way. And the reason for all of this is that it's difficult for democracies to rally up to sort of a war footing or near war footing ideologically, if not physically, with a identified adversary, enemy, whatever the term. And that is how it should be. It shouldn't be easy for democracies to sort of jump up and say, this is countries. And so they go through this very laborious process. We did in America in World War One, World War Two. It took a while even in Cold War, but that had slightly different iterations. It's taken a long time to acknowledge the threat that China poses. And even till today, it's not all there. I mean, there's big American companies that still invest a lot. There are a lot of people in America who still, I think the TikTok discussion going on in America tells you where we are at. Our ability to pass legislative actions on this should also be telling. You hear from India, oh my God, you cannot Quad is something that increasingly get defined from what it is not than what it is. Everybody starts by saying Quad is not a military alliance around China. Quad is not a military. Quad, so thou shalt not protest too much, all because of, again, not calling China out. Of course, China sees the Quad exactly the different way. So there are necessary inbuilt democratic reasons why it takes us a while to confront these things as opposed to just jumping on them. And I think that's how they should be. It's inefficient, but better. And the strength of democracy than being the other way around, where you're jumping up and down, calling people enemy on a drop of a hat every day, all day. So, but having said that, you're right. I mean, we have let this thing play out largely because if you actually commit to it, there are substantial costs, and those costs will be borne by your entire citizenry, and you have to prepare your citizenry for this sort of a conflict. And I don't think we have done that yet. And I think just like we did in previous iterations, we are looking. I mean, I would hope that an American president or American leader would have that honest conversation with the American public and say, "Hey, this is what I'm looking at. This is what might come to, not necessarily, but might come to. And if so, we should all be ready on how we deal with it." So I just think that's where we need to be. We're not there. I think there are many fine leaders in America who make this point in various shape and forms. We'll see where it goes. I think Modi has been extraordinary on your end. His continuity in government and his being able to hold this. He's the only Indian Prime Minister that I know who's allowed this sort of a focus from India, which has been lacking. And so one would hope that continues after him. I'm not sure how that would pan out. Abe was fantastic on that end from Japanese side. I think his early demise is very, very strongly felt ever since he's gone in this area. So there are there. I think Ursula von der Leyen, among all the European leaders, is more sort of forward leaning on this than others are. So there is a core group there that we should all help each other towards sort of going in the same direction.
So we understand the de-risking and decoupling strategy is now being undertaken by United States and its European allies, but keeping the focus on maritime and maritime domain challenges in the Indo-Pacific, specifically from China, I want to bring another issue, that is Chinese naval spat with the Philippines. What should be the US posture? Because since 2016 onwards, when China actually disregarded the international tribunal's findings, which went in favor of the Philippines, China has been making bellicose statements and showing belligerent behavior and actually using the Coast Guard of China, not in an appropriate manner for which Coast Guard is designed, and using it as a naval force, essentially de facto. What is going to be the US posture if that theater becomes hot?
I think, well, I think that, I mean, I think Biden administration has done a substantial amount of strengthening American sort of defense agreement across the Indo-Pacific, and one of which was sort of re-upping and making stronger, I think, the 1951 Mutual Defense Agreement between us and Philippines, which is not only strengthened, renewed, but also expanded to cover Coast Guards. I think that's apart from Navy, just to referring to your part. So I think, and also our sort of our basing within the Philippines is also sort of re-upped a bit. So we are where we need to be with Philippines. I think we're making the right way. It's an issue that is dealt with on a pretty much a daily, hourly basis, to how to sort of manage this in the most responsible way, which both deters China's sort of bellicosity within the region without being an excuse to turn it into something much bigger. So I think it's been handled. I think things are things are where they need to be within that given context, without not giving in too much, but at the same time not being so cavalier about it that it spins out of control. So that's going on. I think the bigger concern really would be Taiwan, and then another more sort of serious concern in some ways, not more, but equally serious concern are issues related of Chinese sort of overtures and outreach in the Pacific Islands. The Pacific Islands are very key to maintaining basically free navigation, as you said, between Philippines, Hawaii, and the West Coast. So these Pacific Islands are, if anybody with World War II history knows how expensive they were to sort of get on one by one on the way to Japan. So I think same thing holds true today. So all those things are they're very complex, critical, dynamic, fast moving issues, and the I think the United States where it's at now, where it needs to be obviously is that our defense budget needs to be almost twice what it is today. So I mean that's the key. So the long answer to all this is that our edge and our sort of capability needs to be much in advance of our adversaries, so that our adversary does not feel emboldened for any sort of misadventures. The possibility of misadventures rises when you have equipoise in capabilities, and diminishes when there is a substantial asymmetry in capabilities. So I think the long and short answer for the United States is to reaffirm that asymmetry in capabilities, so that we are much better able to discourage misadventures, rather than trying to manage it in a state of equipoise, which is complicated. Hence, you go back to Reagan's theory about peace through strength. The only time you can assure peace is when you have substantial hard power competitive advantages. You don't have it, you are running into dangerous times. And so we are indeed certainly in dangerous times. Yes.
I perfectly agree with you, and I'll bring another issue that we have not discussed, and that is Chinese posture on Senkaku Islands vis-a-vis Japan. If and China again is violating the Japanese airspace, China is violating the Japanese maritime domain, and again taking belligerent hostile actions. In the eventuality that plan takes over Senkaku Islands, what would be the US posture?
Um, well, of course, I think I don't know what it would be, but it'd be difficult to imagine something that we are not supporting Japan. But I think it would be uh, not sure is the wisest course of action for Japan to do something like that. The issue is more, if you're familiar with the island, I think the merit is more about denying access to the adversary rather than occupying it yourselves. I think that's more the strategic point of view on it. So I take that hypothetical with sort of rather minimal sort of probability addressing that. But the bigger issue again of you know Chinese, this provocative behavior of China and Russia is very similar. They play up the same darn role. They just keep prodding, pushing, and see where there is a give. And if you give in too much, then they'll keep taking it. So the question is not to give. And so I think with both Russia and China, they're very similar in that way. One is pushing on the NATO Atlantic front. The other one is pushing on the Indo-Pacific South China front, and then both, and including on border with India. So I think they all need to be told that there is not much value for them to be doing it. And in that end, I mean, again, there is a very sort of weirdly, as India, as Americans' knowledge of Indian democracy and misguided criticism, it's matched by India and Asian sort of knowledge or very sort of perspectives on NATO and somehow being ill of everything. So I think they're matched in their ignorance and their analysis on both ends, because in the end we're working towards a collective security or sort of aperture structure within the Indo-Pacific. I mean, there's many small hesitant stuff towards it. There's a trilateral here, the trilateral there, there's a trilateral exercise there, the trilateral exercise there, there's another pact there, there's another pact there. And but God forbid you say collective security, they all throw their hands up and no, we're far from it, we're not in it. You are much better off, if any country, if you only have an asymmetrical byline with America backing in an asymmetrical way that said, hey, if you're attacked, we'll be there to support you. You know, the line all the way from South Korea down to Papua New Guinea to Australia, rather than a place where it says, hey, if you're attacked, not only in America, but Japan and Australia and India will be there on your behalf. And if you did, so I mean, that is literally what has led to the largest peace and prosperity in Europe. And I think we're sort of inching our way with lots of protesting that that is not the way we are going in the Indo-Pacific world for all of the stuff that you talked about, from Sakaku Islands to Taiwan to Philippines to down to Vietnam to China Sea. They're all sort of headed, including even on the U.S.-India border. So I think we're inching our way towards it, and I believe you would require that sort of either a formal or an informal structure to be able to deter this constant prodding. And yeah, there's an old article of mine called IPTO, time for an IPTO, not IPATO, but yeah, Indo-Pacific Treaty Organization. But yes, um, just not because of any other reason. It is just smart. It's just smart national interest, the real politic, common sense. So
I think
anyway,
that's
so
a very
that's
interesting point that you're talking about IPTO. Just
yeah.
for our viewers, uh, there was so-called Manila Pact or Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, SEATO, that became defunct in 1970s. So we understand there's a history. And if we look at the ASEAN, there's a terrible reluctance on part of ASEAN countries either to deal with China or to call Chinese bluff. For last 20 years, ASEAN has not been able to negotiate a code of conduct in South China Sea with China. So again, the issue is that it's not just India. You have to see how Asian psyche works. Uh, I have written an article on IPCO, Indo-Pacific Cooperation Organization, because I believe that APEC does not include India, and that has both contributions by China as well as United States. So we need to leave APEC behind and have Indo-Pacific Cooperation Organization as a roadblock to a collective security arrangement, either formalized or unformalized. But I've come to a very specific point. Will United States continue to espouse one China policy,
Yeah,
or
yeah, I think the
give up
question
that
is,
strategic
yeah.
ambiguity vis-a-vis Taiwan?
Well, I mean, I think again, Mike Pompeo is on record, including I think today or yesterday, that U.S. should recognize Taiwan. I mean, so there's a sort of a growing thrust of folks within U.S. who are saying it. I just think again, um easier to say it. I mean, I'm as sort of forward leaning as you get from the U.S. side of our engagement on the world stage, but it should be forward leaning with sort of very wide and clear eyed. The whole idea is to prevent wars, not start them. That's the point. So they have to judge everything by the goal of preventing wars, which sometimes means that you need to be equally ready to engage in one, so that the other person doesn't feel that that they have the higher upper end in bluffing you and things of that kind. But um, there's an inertia element of it, which to say to change a sort of present policy, you need to have really good reasons to change it, with a clear objective and a line of why you're changing and how will that change help you, rather than just sound like a good idea, we just ought to do it. So I just think so it needs to be more thought given to that particular point, to sort of go away from the two China policies or something else. In theory, yes, I obviously, I mean, by default, we're kind of supporting the idea that Taiwan has the right to be, self-determination, and should not be externally coaxed into its determination. I think that's, in some ways, is a pretty clear policy and holds it. Now, whether that precludes self-determination, precludes joining China, I don't think it needs to. They all elected and want to do it. I don't know why somebody would be against the idea. So where we are at, I think at this moment, supporting the self-determination, if we change from that, there should be a very clear and a very persuasive argument of how that would make things better. And if that's the case, then you sort of deal with it then. It's sort of a similar situation of two-state solution in Israel. I mean, it sort of sounds good, but by every passing year, it's a practical feasibility of that diminishes. But you still say it, because if you don't say it, what's the other alternative, which is more persuasive, more, or when a more well reasoned, doesn't present itself. So you're stuck with the inertia of it. So I think that's where we are at on these two positions, which are sort of historical episode that we do have to deal with. Yeah.
I think the strategic ambiguity across Taiwan Straits on part of US may have worked historically. However, we have something new, and that something new is Xi Jinping, who has said that it's not a question of, if, it's a question of when reunification is going to happen. They are very clear-cut statements, and people are saying that it will be around 2027 that China will force, quote unquote, so-called reunification of Taiwan with the motherland. Should US be doing something preventively?
Well, I think we're doing as much as we can to sort of prevent it to some degree. So yeah, again, I think the going beyond where we are at, it needs to improve our capabilities. It's back to our defense posture. We need to get our budget situation, at least if not exactly the same level, closer to what it was in the Cold War, to be able to sort of deter these exercises rather than encourage them. I think that's where you're at. I mean, the policy wise and otherwise, we're kind of taking a relatively strong stand. I think President Biden on record has said more than once that they'll come to Taiwan's aid, which then his administration has taken labors to correct him on that and amend it, but he has said it a couple of times. So I think he certainly deserves credit for that. What you can do more, and the end of the day, you can have policies and policies, but you need to have more capabilities. You got to have more capabilities into a defense budget, which is closer to 6 than smaller than 4.
Talking about capabilities, having discussed certain issues with, strategic experts from Taiwan, they have said that there has been less than optimal rate of transfer of modern weapons into Taiwan from US despite congressional approval, under the latent fear that if China were to occupy Taiwan, all the advanced US technology will end up going to communist China. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not a Taiwan expert, so I defer to people who are. I think, these are sort of modalities where you'll always have a difference between a more hawkish administration and a less hawkish and a more cautious administration, back and forth. I think same thing comes to play in our help for Ukraine. I mean, the same sort of an idea. So I think there's debates on both ends. There are people who say, I don't know if the argument is that the Chinese will get hold of it. I think more it is that how provocative do I want this to be vis-a-vis the adversary? I mean, that's the more, the more stronger point, and why not arm them up to the hilt, both defensive weapons, and then the question comes how many offensive weapons and how many sort of interceptory weapons, all the rest of it. So what kind of weapons, as much, and so there was a difference of opinion between the Taiwanese, what they wanted and what we thought they should have, and what their military strategy should be. And so, a lot of that going on at display with even in Ukraine. So those are, it's easier to stand. This is the easiest thing to stand on the corridor on the sidelines and sort of pick and choose and say, yeah, if I was you, I would have done that, or I would have done this, or I would have given that weapon, or given this weapon. There'd be no end to it in any administration in any place all the time. I think a more fundamental point is you need to get the defense budget up. We just cannot hold all this through with our existing budget. We just need to get that budget up. I mean, that's really the bottom line for us. Much more important than these sort of more tactical issues.
Granted that point, China's military jingoism and hegemonic ambitions have actually advanced in parallel to their economic clout following their unconditional entry into WTO. And China has engaged in predatory mercantilism with all the countries, not just with United States, pretty much with all the countries, either through BRI or other mechanisms. Knowing that what is feeding the beast is the trade surpluses with pretty much every other country. Should they be rethinking about China's place in WTO because it never adhered to the conditionalities that were proposed at the time of entry by Bill Clinton?
Yeah, so the question, yes. I mean, I think the point being that China's behavior, on the global scale and the economic front is basically the biggest market distorting factor on the global stage, period. We did the whole WTO was to reduce market distortion. Then you let in the second largest economy, who's the sort of the primary actor of market distortion. And then once the actor is in, the WTO structure, unlike the World Bank and IMF, is set up more like a UN General Assembly, a one person, one vote, one country, one vote. To now change it to a level where you can sort of bring it back on level, it can happen, but probably difficult because China has sort of economic coercion writ large in a lot of these countries, among other things. So you have to sort of reevaluate what what is the future course of WTO. It's certainly a much narrower one than it was anticipated. So the question then is what's the narrower sort of aperture and scope of WTO where it can truly still be functional. It's not entirely clear what that is and where it is. Maybe the fishing subsidiary. I mean, they just recently, if they were able to come up with a subsidy agreement, which again, China is the biggest culprit on that, and the Chinese, as you said, fishing fleet and Coast Guard, which is basically mujahideens on ocean. So I think this sort of issue comes into play. Maybe that's where it has a role. But then you have to look at and say, okay, what is the sort of alternative trading regime where free market trading big nations like G7, like Quad nations, like others can engage with. And so you're not necessarily having these words of decoupling and de-risking. I don't know what they mean, other than they sound politically good. But we're probably going towards a global economy which is stratified, a sort of a stratified global economy, where broadly several stratas, but three broad ones, where on one end you will have sort of close to decoupling, like semiconductors or very high end stuff, where you just basically live in two different worlds. And then the exact opposite, on the other end of it, you'll have something where you're making furniture or making toys or whatever, that they can be as integrated as they are today. And then somewhere in the middle, you'll have areas where you'll have to sort of pick and choose and see how we're going to run this, whether it be a solar panels or EV cars or something like that. And they would be somewhere in the middle, where you have to say, okay, we can, but we've got to have appropriate sort of constraints so that we don't have this massive dumping going on by. So it is not precluding them, but we cannot allow massive dumping of things from one entity on the other. And so then the question is, okay, how do we decide, and who do we collectively decide how to shape this, or we unilaterally are deciding how to shape it? Right now, we are sort of unilaterally taking shots at it. I think at some point we'll probably again move to a collective action on this between Quad countries, European countries, American, North American nations, to say, okay, here is how. Again, we're moving towards it in bits and parts, bits and parts. This is all a story about how we're sort of stumbling onto collective security, collective economic sort of resilience strategies, one efficient dawdling over the other. But that's where we are headed to. And I think when the timing is right, there's plenty of ideas, and including some suggested by me, that when the timing is right, hopefully it'll click, and we'll be in that world.
As
Over.
you have talked about, geoeconomics and geopolitics are intricately, woven together. Without having economic heft, you cannot actually build up your military muscle. That is what China is doing. That is what every great power does. On hindsight, do you think it was a mistake on part of the Trump administration to withdraw from the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Arrangement, CPTPP?
I think that is one of the largest strategic blunders. Yes, I just think that yes, I mean, as a strategic play, it is very, very useful and very important. Yes. The short answer. I think I have a longer one, but yes.
Uh, there are a lot of comments in the chat room, which we have already addressed into our discussion. Bottom line is that all the democracy, in order to safeguard the democracy, have to increase their defense budgets and budgetary overlays from meager 1.5% to maybe 3.5% in the national scenario. So unless that happens, you will have a potential hegemon like China with unlimited foreign exchange reserves, that is buying, access to nations, whether it is in Africa through BRI or in PIF, Pacific Islands Forum. Pretty much, overnight governments are being quote unquote managed. I won't use the word bribe because of its tough connotations, but that is what is happening. So I think there is a need for understanding the sensitivities in bilateral relationships, if we have to challenge, face this challenge. It's a common challenge for humanity because an authoritarian, totalitarian, communist ideologue is trying to hold the entire world to ransom. And that is not based in Russia, that is based in China. Unless we smell coffee and understand where the real threat is coming from and not focus, fritter away our energies into minor players or have been players, I think we will continue to have a stalemate in promoting common security interests across Asia and across the Indo-Pacific. Last comments, Dr. Ara?
No, I think that's what you're saying. It sort of kind of makes sense. I think those are well said out. Not to add much, but we're to your broader point. I think, which is what we've been talking for last hour, is that let's focus on core areas. Let's focus on collective action. Let's focus on collective areas within our national interest. Let's minimize the peripheral noise to this end, especially on semantics, for Lord's sake. And I think back on what you mentioned on TPP, I think it's a useful stuff just to keep in mind, and so how semantics can be very sort of damaging. So TPP was more seen as a traditional free trade agreement, and as a result was couched in that context as something that's taking jobs and markets out and giving undue advantage out of America to the region. And it was a real mistake of the leaders, which is really Obama, President Obama, and I think hats off to a guy named Michael Froman, who is now the president of Council of Foreign Relations. But he's the one who sort of worked very hard to make it happen, and he worked equally hard earlier on to do stuff with the transatlantic TTIP. There was a transatlantic investment, trade and investment partnership, which died earlier and quicker than TPP did. But you have to see them in a broader context of what happened. We were in an era of bilateral trade. Then we moved from an era of bilateral trade to regional trade. And then we said, if there's a global trade phenomena, it'll be more efficient and that'll work. That's how we got into WTO, working from all the way from 1948 till when WTO was formed, the Uruguay rounds and Doha rounds, and we wonder when China came into WTO, people already figured out that the global stuff won't work, and they were already moving back to regional agreements because largely of China. And those two regional agreements took the shape of TPP on one end and TTIP on the other. So this is related to your idea of people not being bold enough to call an enemy or an adversary, and as a result, using all kind of other euphemism, in this case, facilitating trade, certainly not above, WTO, a global trade facilitation. So that was the context, and that was never explained very well to American public by the people who were designing it. And so they saw it not as a strategic national security initiative, but rather as one another trade agreement on a line of trade agreements that went on. So I think that missed the boat. And that's a good sort of thing to end on, to say, hey, focus on core areas, speak plainly to your own people, don't spend that much time on periphery, frame the issue as they are so that people don't feel that you're blowing smoke, by them, and then work together with like-minded countries where you have very core shared national interest, not because of some very sort of nostalgic emotional reasons, but very hard, realistic, realpolitik reasons. So, to all that end, I think US India relationships are on a good track. I hope, obviously, that they move on faster than they do on occasions, but at least they're headed in the right direction. And I appreciate your time and thought, and everybody else who seem to share your opinions on the topic. So appreciate the opportunity and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Arha, for coming on the Council for Strategic Affairs platform. This is the first time you are coming on our platform. We understand the difficulties, when you are in a different country, but we were able to have this interaction. We hope that you will continue to come on our platform. My thanks also to our audience, wherever they are, based in US, in Canada, in India, that on a Saturday morning or evening, whatever the local time is, took almost 1.5 hours and waited patiently for Dr. Arha to join, because I was worried that people will just log out if they see that Dr. Arha is not able to join. So thank you, our audience members, to continue to participate and wait for Dr. Arha to join. My thanks also to teams CSA, Mr. Rikudaman Pachori and Mr. Rajiv Verma, who helped me plan these kind of meetings and events. So thank you very much indeed. And we hope that future is brighter for humanity and we can avoid wars and increase the world prosperity and have people to people dialogue, of which this is one small example. Thank you very much indeed. The recording would be available on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. Bye-bye.